are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, great to be back alongside you.
It is a pleasure to be back alongside you, Eugene. Another great show with great guests to come.
Yes, a lot going on in the world, and we have a lot coming to you. And I will just use that as a segue into a reminder that if you are watching us on YouTube, now would be a great opportunity for you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to make sure that you have the alerts for the things that you subscribe to. And go one step further than that, you should go into your notifications and make sure you have notifications on. So subscribe, hit the bell, turn on notifications so that you do not have to work hard to see all of the fantastic content that we have coming out here on Breakthrough News, including dispatches with Rania Khalek. So you don't want to miss any of that. So definitely subscribe, hit the bell, turn your notifications on. And if you happen to be watching us on Free Speech TV, shout out to you. Just keep watching. And big shout out to the whole FSTV team for making it possible for us to appear on that platform as well. Rania, are there other things you would like to remind our viewers of?
Indeed, there are, Eugene. I want to remind everybody that we here at Breakthrough News are an independent media outlet, so you have to do everything in your power to help us go and grow. And that could be as simple as smashing the like button. It helps boost us. Like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Make sure you're subscribed to Breakthrough News. Thank you. Thank you. Make sure you're subscribed to Breakthrough News on all of your social media platforms, but make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. And if you are subscribed, make sure you've hit that bell, including the part that says all, so that you get a notification every time we post content so that you don't miss any of our programming here. And you can do even bigger things by supporting us monetarily by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news and becoming a member for as little as $5 a month, where you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch like this very cool mug. It says BT logo on one side, Breakthrough on the other. I love this mug. Doesn't come with the straw. That's my straw, but the mug is very cool. And most importantly, you can basically, like, other than just getting cool stuff like this very cool mug and getting access to certain special parts of my show dispatches and other things, you'll also be helping to support an independent media outlet that is committed to bringing you independent journalism that is not funded by Larry Ellison or by weapons companies, but by its viewers. So it actually tells you the truth. So patreon.com/breakthrough news. You can also donate in the live chat if you would like to just do a one-time donation, or you can go through to breakthroughnews.org and you can give us a one-time donation there.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we've got a lot for you here on the show, so go ahead and strap in. Maybe let people know that we are live. We're talking about strikes. We'll have multiple perspectives on what's happening in Iran. We're going to be talking about how your retirement fund could be actually funding ICE, or at least some of what they're doing, and also some on-the-ground reporting from the current situation going on in Cuba, which is continuing to face threats from the U.S. government as the Latin America saga continues to drag on. So a lot in the world, a lot on the show. Very happy to have you with us. We're going to turn to our first story here, which is the largest ever nurses strike in the history of New York City. Roughly 15,000 New York City nurses are on strike across several hospital systems. It's made national news in many ways, and we are very, very honored to have with us here Dolores Steele, who's a transplant nurse at New York Presbyterian Hospital. Dolores, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. And I guess I'll just start with, what are the issues that are at stake here? Obviously, I know nurses, you all are caring for people day in and day out. So I would assume if you took this step of going out on the picket line, it was not taken lightly.
No, and thank you for saying that. 15,000 nurses are not going out for wages. I'm telling you that right now. We have been fighting for safe staffing and enforceable safe staffing, which means that there are actual fines to the systems when they do not follow the safe staffing grids if they're put in place. We're looking to improve workplace violence issues. We all know it's getting more and more violent out there, and it does not stop at the door. And people come in, and rightly so. They're scared, they're emotional, and it can tend to lead to situations that are unsafe for the nurses and more importantly, unsafe for the other patients. Overcrowding leads to longer wait times, leads to less room. Our emergency rooms, they're horror shows. Management has nurses basically Jenga beds, and they're blocking entrances. And, the security is very lax. They're letting patients in with all kinds of weapons. We have been asking for weapons detectors at all entrances, not metal detectors, weapons detectors, because we all know that there are weapons that are not metal that people can get in. And they're not listening to us. And the sad part about it is now that they've bussed in all these scab nurses, the staffing ratios that we're hearing from in the hospital from our brethren who are still in there, our 1199 members, are better than the ones that we've been begging for. The security is better than what we've been begging for. It's amazing that they are doing for these scab nurses who, I'm sorry to say, are not, for the most part, we don't believe that they are up to par being able to take care of our patients. Unfortunately, the governor passed a law or emergency act that people who normally would not be able to be licensed in New York State are able to work in New York State. So you have people who aren't up to our state standards and honestly aren't up to our hospital standards. These three hospitals they do things in these hospitals that you don't do in a lot of other hospitals. And the level of acuity and what you need to do for patient care is higher than what it is in a lot of not talking down on any other hospital, but it is what it is. And we want our patients to have the best of everything. And for these large hospital systems, it is all about money. They are squeezing everything, not just nursing staff, but every staff. And they are squeezing, it's heartbreaking. Sometimes it's hard to talk about, but, and they want to take our health benefits. We got them through COVID. We are facing the largest flu epidemic in a long time. And, this is not an easy job. It's heavy on our body. We're exposed to things that every day that people aren't normally exposed to. We just want good health care. It just boggles at my mind that they want to cut our health care.
That's so crazy. And the hospital executives, they'll often frame this as a labor dispute just over pay. And of course, that's part of it, obviously fair wages, but nurses have been clear that this is also about, staffing levels. And as you've mentioned, safety, patient safety. Can you explain what understaffing actually looks like on the hospital floor and how it affects patient outcomes, especially in high stakes units like transplants, as you're very familiar with?
So, I mean, you can look this up. The numbers have kind of stayed the same over the years as I've looked at them. For, each extra patient that you give to a nurse, there is a 7% increase in possible mortality to that patient. There is a 7% increase in failure to rescue. You have less time to assess your patients. You have less time to monitor your patients. You have less time for patient education, which for transplant patients, that is a paramount part of what we do. When you have a transplant, that is a lot of education and a lot of new things you need to learn all of a sudden, because that's how fast a transplant happens. And if we don't have time to educate the patient, they are coming back. They are coming back for rejection. They are coming back for infections. And that's just my unit. I mean, I can't speak to other units because, like I said, our hospitals are very specialized. You could not put me in many of the other places in our hospital because they are that specialized. And that is another issue that our management has. They love to say a nurse is a nurse is a nurse. Well, I beg to differ. Please don't put me on an L&D floor because I would not know what to do.
I think it's sort of amazing to see the, I think it was, I don't know for which hospital system, but one of the executives says that the nurses' demands were reckless and I think irresponsible, he also said. And they're sort of pleading poverty as always, like, we can't hire more people, we can't do anything like that because we don't have any money. But, when you just Google it, like if you Google New York Presbyterian Hospital profits, it's not for profit, but you can see they're making huge sums of money and the CEOs are making huge sums of money. So I wonder how it feels as nurses who are out there working all day to see these giant pay packages for executives and then they turn around and say, we can't address any of your issues.
Well, I can tell you in 2024, Steve Corwin made $26 million dollars. The executive compensation package for all the C-suite executives was over $64 million dollars.
Hmm.
The revenue net profit for NYP was more than $500 million. If you look, NYP and Columbia are the biggest landowners uh, together
Hmm.
in New York City after New York City. And
Wow.
they are nonprofit, and I don't see how they can be nonprofit. To call us greedy and to call us asking for things that we are asking for what we need. We know what we need. We are on the floors every day. We are next to those patients every day. We know the level of support we need. We're not asking to do what is happening right now in the hospital where these nurses are sitting around and there's 3 and 4 nurses. I'm not kidding you, 3 and 4 nurses for the same amount of patient load that we would have. They're sitting on their phones. I mean, we're not asking for that. We're asking to be able to do what we want to do. I have been on my unit for almost 20 years. It will be 20 years this October. I didn't leave because I like where I work. I like the people I work with. I love the population I work with. And I will tell you the way the nurses are feeling right now, the biggest thing I am getting from people is a sense of betrayal.
Hmm.
I have a lot of nurses that just said, I didn't think they would do this. I didn't think they would do this. People who have invested even into the magnet process for the hospital because they really believe that the hospital was a magnet hospital. And they're saying, this is not a magnet hospital. It is not about nurses up. It is about management down. And you can't run an institution that takes care of patients if you don't listen to people at the front lines. And New York Presbyterian does not. And from what I know from the other two, they don't either.
Hmm.
I wanted to ask you, I saw now Mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, has backed
Mhm,
the nurses on this strike, spoke, was at the picket line with you guys. And I'm
mhm.
just curious, has that been helpful? Has having a mayor in New York City that supports something like this, obviously it's a positive thing, I would imagine, but how has
No,
that
it
sort of
is. Yeah.
changed the game and made it possible to sort of, I don't know, more enthusiastically do this? I don't know. I'm sure it would have been different under Eric Adams.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. I don't think any of us really listened to him. But it is helped. It is a push. It definitely is a push. We need continual input from the mayor, from Letitia James has supported us. Numerous people in government have supported us. We need continued pressure on NYP. NYP has so much money that they would prefer, they've spent well over $100 million on this strike. If they had put that towards the nurses, we wouldn't be where we are right now. But I believe that they feel that having to continue to provide proper support for the patients, proper staffing for the patients, proper workplace violence to protect the patients and the nurses, and proper health care for the nurses. I believe personally that they look at it as a long-term investment they would rather not make. They would rather make a big time investment right now.
Hmm. Well, we know that this is an ongoing situation and many things could be ongoing, but I know you are keeping the picket lines up. And just judging from what I've seen on social media, it seems like people from around the New York area have been joining you. For people who may be seeing
They
this
have
and
been.
wondering how they can support the nurses, what can they do and how important is it for people to show solidarity?
Oh, it's very important. These hospitals depend on their reputation, which I feel is being tarnished right now. That is not our intent, but it is what it is. People coming out on the picket line, people emailing, contacting the heads of these hospitals, people contacting the governor, asking her to rescind that order. Keeping the pressure on these major hospitals because the truth of the matter is another thing that kind of hurts my heart is people are afraid to go to the doctor. And
Hmm.
I don't want people to get sicker because they didn't go to the doctor because there's a strike going on. Go in, get treated, and then you know what, come out and when you feel better, support us on the line. But please, I wanted to get that out there. Don't not get treated. Don't hold up for your health.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, and real quick, I also wanted to just ask, I know this is very specific to New York City, but this is, I think, a nationwide problem. And I'm just curious, is there any conversation with other nurses unions around the country who are dealing with the same issues that nurses in New York City are dealing with?
Well, NYSNA has joined with National Nurses United, which kind of came out of the push in California when they got the staffing ratios. And, to be honest, if you look at it, they've been able to maintain it. And, I know it's expensive, but it is the cost of doing business. Business is not cheap. Everything is up. And, if you really have to talk about wages, they are inflating what we're asking. There is in no way, shape, or form we are asking for $270,000 a year. And the numbers that they put out, our salaries plus what it costs for our healthcare, which we deserve. But yeah, we are working with National Nurses United. I personally don't know of other unions that NYSNA is working for, but I'm a little focused on New York right now, so they may be.
Well, historic strike, historic struggle, and gaining a lot of support all around the country, even because I think a lot of us understand how it's been as patients themselves. Dolores Steele, transplant nurse, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate this.
Absolutely. Yeah. What a situation.
I'm just remembering, look, I mean, obviously anybody who's ever spent time in a hospital knows that it's nurses that are taking care of you the entire time. Obviously, doctors will come in and check on you and decide what medications you're going to take, but it's entirely nurses that you're talking to who are giving you your meds, who are taking your blood, dealing with your IV, everything. And so just the idea of, this really just demonstrates the priorities of our healthcare system at the end of the day, which is all about money to these managerial executives, and not actually about delivering good care.
No, 100%. I've actually been in an ER at a New York Presbyterian hospital in New York, and what she's saying about overcrowding is so true. One specific incident I'm thinking about, I was in the hallway, you know what I mean? Because there were just no more rooms that were there. And the number of nurses, you could see they were up against it in terms of what was taking place. And everything worked out and I got great care, but you could just see obviously, it was a ridiculous situation where they were trying to nickel and dime everybody else so that they can pay people tens of millions of dollars. But it really is, Mount Sinai, Montefiore, New York Presbyterian Hospital, none of them are hurting for money. And quite frankly, I think the point you're making, Rania, our overall healthcare system, the lack of investment that is really made at a governmental level to make sure people actually have what you might argue is the most important thing after food is just abysmal and just shameful, quite frankly, that we're still in this sort of for-profit model. So yeah, very interesting to see. And I thought very notable how they've brought in all these scabs and, they're getting things that, the actual workers themselves did not get. And they've spent, I think Dolores said over $100 million. It just shows how it really isn't about the money or anything like that. It's just they don't want to they don't want people to have more control over their own workplace. And that's what having a union is really about, is being able to take control over your own workplace and have some say in your working conditions and in your wages. And they just don't want that under any circumstance, which is a shame. But we shall see. It's getting a lot of support all across the city of New York. That much I can say. It seems like people are certainly with the nurses and not with the hospitals. And I would say $270,000 a year does not, $100,000 a year does not sound like that much for someone working as a full-time nurse in a major hospital in New York City. But I digress, Rania. That's a whole other issue in terms of the cost of living in the United States. But even the fact that people would feel like that's some crazy sum of money, especially if you're living in this area, New York City area where I am talking to you right now, it's wild. But anyway, let's move on. We want to get into what is one of the biggest stories on earth right now, and rightfully so. That's the ongoing protest movement in Iran, Trump's threats to strike Iran, Israeli threats that are sort of in the same vein, all the different things that are swirling around this, which of course, in the midst of everything happening, I think around the globe, are just part of a very newsworthy week here that we're having. But we want to just get right into it here now. And to start our conversation off on this issue, we have Jamal Abdi, who's the president of the National Iranian American Council, with us. Jamal, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you here. Interesting poll that was circulating yesterday from Quinnipiac that I think it was some 70 some odd percent of people in the United States opposed Trump's sort of semi-announced plans to potentially bomb Iran, allegedly in support of the protest. And I guess I just wanted to start there to see, how do you evaluate Trump's he hasn't necessarily done anything yet in that sense, but at least rhetorical sense approach that he may take military action, and that in fact will be good for the people on the ground in Iran.
Yeah, what a surprise. Americans don't want to enter another open-ended regime change war in the Middle East. I don't know what's their problem. But so as far as Trump's rhetoric, like, he is telling people to go out into the streets, put their bodies on the line, and that help is on the way. And I think that, first of all, just putting aside what options the president has, if he's going to make a promise to people and people are going to go out and get killed, one would hope he would keep that promise. But that then leads to point number two, which is that there is no help that the United States can provide that would actually, I think, help the Iranian people, particularly if the idea is that they want a democracy that respects human rights. I don't know if you put together a list of people who should be considered eligible to transition a country to democracy and human rights. Donald Trump would probably be on the bottom of that list, given that he is defending security forces in the United States, shooting people in the face, given that he is disputing elections. I mean, this is the last guy who I would think is the savior of the Iranian people, or any people who want democracy and human rights. I think none of this negates the fact that that is what Iranians do want. But you have people like Trump, like some of these exile opposition leaders, who are trying to insert themselves. And what they're not doing is providing leadership for the Iranian people or even solidarity. They're providing co-option. And I think that's just deeply irresponsible.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen these reports basically from the Israelis kind of bragging, whether, it's exaggerated or not, bragging that they're involved and like they're helping arm protests and they want to cause destabilization and chaos. And then you've got a lot of really hawkish diaspora voices too, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, who are calling for bombing as well and claiming to represent the true desires of the Iranian people. And I think that puts, NIAC, the National Iranian American Council, which you represent, in a really unique position, because obviously, you all have expressed solidarity with protests and you want to see an Iran that has, more democracy, and, respects human rights in all the ways you wanted to, but you are firmly opposed to any sort of foreign U.S. military intervention. So I just kind of wanted to give you the opportunity to address that, the fact that, there are these diaspora voices that claim to speak on behalf of Iranians. You see them a lot, in LA, some of them coming out of Canada, claiming they want to see, the Shah's son in charge of Iran, and just, saying that Trump is doing the best thing ever and should bomb the country. What is your take on those voices?
Yeah, I think it's really also sad that Iranians are putting their lives on the line, have so few avenues to express themselves, to dissent, to organize. And then here outside of Iran, where we are free to organize and express our dissent and use our voices and try to build something, instead, we have some people who are more committed to attacking one another, to spreading disinformation online, and to just making this debate really about centering themselves at the expense of Iranians. I think when we talk about, there's this debate online. I don't know, I see a lot of people talking about the debate. I haven't seen the debate itself as much, but this notion that either you're on the side of standing up to colonialism and imperial powers and Israel and the United States, and you think the protests are fake, or you're on the side of the Iranian people and you want the U.S. to invade Iran. And I just think those are just gross misrepresentations of what is actually happening. Two things can be true. Iranians can be extremely frustrated and frankly done with having an Islamic Republic theocratic system that rules over every aspect of their lives and has mismanaged the country in so many ways. It's also true that Israel, and to a large extent the United States, has an interest in exploiting the feelings of the Iranian people, and frankly have had a role in manufacturing some of that. It's not just the Islamic Republic repressing internally. There is repression from the outside through these sanctions, through this pressure, these other measures that, again, you don't need to, you don't need to hear it from me. You listen to the people who created these policies. These are policies aimed at starving Iranians so that they turn out into the streets and call for regime change. But they're not aimed at helping Iran build a democracy internally by strengthening the people, by strengthening the middle class, by connecting Iranians with the rest of the world, by reducing the securitization of civil society inside of Iran. Instead, it's aimed at impoverishing people so that they are so weak relative to their government that they have to beg imperial powers to come in and save them, which is not how democracies get created. So I think there's a lot of ambivalence about what to think right now because we want to stand for the Iranian people. We want to do work in solidarity with them, but we also recognize that there is this campaign to undermine them. There's this campaign to co-opt their voices to serve interests of Israel and the United States. And there's a campaign online to try to position certain figures as the leaders of a movement where they haven't even been on the ground in Iran for decades. And I think that is also, I mean, as far as, claims of what's happening on the ground in Iran, clearly the protests have been more violent. There are claims that have gone back and forth. I think if any claims of outside interference or, sending arms in or anything like that, there needs to be an independent investigation. Otherwise, I'm not taking any of that at face value. I know that they're more violent. As far as any outside interference, there needs to be an independent investigation to get to the bottom of this. But we do know for a fact that the Israeli government is propping up Reza Pahlavi online through disinformation campaigns, through AI, sock puppet, bots. Haaretz has exposed this. Citizen Lab has exposed this. So these things are not a secret. And I think especially the media and the public needs to know about these things, but not allow that to then say we're going to ignore the voices of Iranians who have legitimate grievances and do deserve solidarity.
I think it's an interesting question that you're raising, and I think the point of it not really being a binary, I think looking especially in terms of what we know is attempting to be imposed from the outside on Iran, I mean, looking at the Iraq precedent, looking at the Libya precedent, I mean, in some degrees, you could even throw in a couple different other countries. I mean, how important is that Iranian voice as well? Because I think that there are people who are coming out into the streets. I mean, it's, presented as, in support of the government, quote unquote, which, it is in some ways, maybe not. But people who maybe fear what could come next and fear whatever grievances they may have with the Islamic Republic, like we're worried about where these protests are going, and thus we're going to stand on the other side of things, or at least the way that's presented. I mean, I think that's also an important perspective that we don't hear a lot about in the West, but seems relevant given what we've seen in the context of the region.
I think there is definitely a fear of instability. There have been chants for Reza Pahlavi, this, the opposition leader who hasn't been in the country for 40 years. I think a lot of that is just there are so few avenues to actually protest or dissent or make, it used to be elections even, as controlled as they are, people would turn out in the elections to be able to express themselves. And the turnout for the last few elections has been just abysmal compared to what it normally is. So the ability for Iranians to actually express themselves and to demand change is so limited that any option that is out there, people are going to end up grasping onto because they see, nothing but obstacles in their way. But that doesn't mean that people want to invite Benjamin Netanyahu in to be the viceroy of Iran or his emissary. And as far as the government, the pro-government protests, I mean, it's clearly a much different context. People are not showing up to these protests and risking their lives and standing up to these are government sanctioned. And so, but I think what's important is, yeah, there is a segment of the population that does support the government. It's probably relatively small and has gotten smaller, but there are people that still support the government. There are, I think, a vast majority who are very frustrated with this government. I just think what is most important then, because we don't have any, we're not there. It is not our job to say what the Iranian people want. But what we should be doing, at least at a policy level, is not attempting to be the puppet masters here and figure out, okay, if you want to hear Iranians, let's figure out ways to not block Iranians from access to the outside world. Let's figure out ways to make sure that our sanctions are not undermining Iranian civil society. Little things like that. But instead, this entire argument is so securitized, and the only tools that we have on the outside are these tools that actually make the problem worse. And so instead, we get these debates about, do Iranians like the government or not like the government? Do they want Reza Pahlavi or do they want this or that? And it's not up for us to decide. Let's put accurate information out there. Let's try to work in solidarity, but number one, let's do no harm as a primary principle.
Speaking of which, when it comes to the policy issue, by the way, I'm really happy you mentioned sanctions, because one thing that is completely left out of mainstream media coverage is the role of U.S. sanctions and playing a major role in harming and creating economic horrors for Iranians, which is, causing a lot of frustration to be, which is totally understandable. But in terms of policy, we're sitting here waiting for Donald Trump to decide, is he going to bomb Iran? Is he not going to bomb Iran? I think yesterday, all of us thought he was going to do it like last night. But it seems as though, at least based on reporting, that you have Gulf Arab states understandably advising him not to do it. Apparently, the Israelis also advise him not to do it, worrying that it would derail the protests. But also you see the administration, the Donald Trump administration, moving this U.S. aircraft carrier from the South China Sea to the Middle East, which is supposed to take a week to get there, which suggests possible preparation for, something bigger. I don't know what. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could happen. This administration is unbelievably unpredictable. But what's very clear is that Trump is surrounded by people who are all barking, yes, we should militarily intervene and do something. And I'm just curious, what's your read on the situation? I know you don't have a crystal ball to predict the future, but the U.S. does seem to be in a bit of a strategic dilemma right now, because it's either like, if you really want to go in and change the regime in Iran, as the Trump administration is saying they want to do, that's, it's a country of 80 million people. You don't do that overnight. But then Trump also wants to go in and do something quick and get out. And it's like, okay, so what do you see happening here?
Yeah, I do think that Trump is keeping his options open. His options actually have been limited, at least militarily, because he's busy changing regimes here in the Western Hemisphere. So the military assets are not there for a prolonged military engagement, engagement where Iran would likely not respond symbolically, but at a level much greater than it has in previous rounds between the U.S. and Israel and Iran. But I think so. First of all, I think the Trump White House Iran policy is filtered through: are we going to piss off Mark Levin, or are we going to piss off Tucker Carlson? And so those are the policy. That's where the policy discussion starts. But I think Trump's inclination, I mean, God, I don't even want to. It is to be a deal maker. Mm-hmm. All right. I mean, this is his tagline. So I don't think Trump actually wants to invest U.S. blood and treasure in a long, bloody war in Iran. And I think what has happened here is that the president was feeling good about taking out Maduro. saw what was happening in Iran, maybe had certain voices trickling up to him, Lindsey Graham, people he's talking to. And so he made this statement and drew a red line and compared himself to Obama, which means he's really serious, and sort of got out ahead of himself and then found out, well, here are the options. If you do a symbolic strike, there's a likelihood the Iranians retaliate, and it's not some cute symbolic thing, but it actually has real repercussions. If you want to do something bigger, well, we're going to need an aircraft carrier. We're going to need to be prepared to go big. If you want to do something small, non-kinetic, cyber, something like that, maybe that is low cost, but it's not sort of the symbolism that Trump wants to show of being tough and actually materially making an impact on the ground. So I think he looked at these options, and it seems clear to me that they've said it, they're back channeling with the Iranians. Trump is even sort of repeating some of the Iranian narratives about what has happened. I think that in his mind, this is all leading to, I'm going to get the Iranians to capitulate. I'm going to get them to cave on enrichment. Maybe even, I think there have been some interesting ideas put out. Crisis Group put out a report about, maybe diplomatic pressure around some of the human rights norms and things like that. Like maybe that should be a part of the conversation. I've been hesitant about that, not because I don't think that diplomatic pressure is important on those things or diplomatic prioritization, but just that I fear that that is then going to be used as a poison pill to try to undermine anything from moving forward. But we're kind of in a different context now. Thousands of people dead. Like, this is a horrible, solemn moment. And so I think we all need to be thinking deep. But anyway, I think that what this is driving out is he thinks he is just building up leverage to try to get a deal with the Iranians. But is very unpredictable. And so I also know that Netanyahu is at his heels, urging, Netanyahu met with him just a week before he made this tweet and got his endorsement for U.S. support for bombing the nuclear sites or bombing ballistic missiles. So we also know the Israelis are chomping at the bit. They don't want Iran to rebuild its air defenses. They don't want Iran to rebuild its nuclear program. So there's also sort of that competing timeline. And Trump is keeping his options open. I think he would rather not be, George W. Bush on steroids. But it may end up going that way depending on how things play out.
Mm-hmm. Jamal Abdi, president of the National Iranian American Council, thank you so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Well, Eugene, we will have to see what happens. It seems like a little time has been bought, but I also hesitate to, by time being bought, if it takes a week for an aircraft carrier to get from the South China Sea back over to the Middle East. I just really quickly, before we move on to our next guest, I wanted to read the beginning of this article from The Atlantic about the U.S. being everywhere because of the move of the aircraft carrier. Pentagon officials are privately warning that the United States may not be able to threaten Venezuela's regime, support protesters seeking to topple Iran's government, and protect its interests in the Asia-Pacific without being overstretched. And it's just like, even a country that spends $1 trillion a year that we know of and has over 1,000 military bases, it's kind of like eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Like, who are you going to target and focus on? It's horrifying. But I guess under the Trump administration, we're really going to get an idea of the limits of this just massive empire.
I think they are certainly pushing it to the limits, and we will see where the seams may burst, but we're not going to leave the issue of Iran just yet. Joining us next to continue our conversation, we are very, very honored to have with us Sina Rahmani, who's the host of The East is a Podcast. Sina, thanks so much for being with us.
Hi. I hope I sound okay. I don't know. I'm using this fancy mic. Okay, good. It's great to be on the show. I'm honored to be with you guys. I'm a big fan of you guys.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Well, look, we're really happy to have you. Yeah, definitely. And the fancy mic is definitely working. Let me maybe just give us some context here, maybe to start in terms of, framing. And I think this is something that people are talking a lot about because obviously, you're seeing in the West a lot of images and discussion about protests that are, ostensibly against the government, although I think there's maybe some nuance there. Then you see the big protests that happen in Tehran and across the country. I think some people were saying 3 million people in Tehran sort of for the government. I mean, this is how it's being presented. So, if you feel like these are oversimplifications, I think please let us know about that too. But I think sometimes people don't, you sort of see dueling sides and sort of the broader context can get lost because it's sort of like, well, I guess it's just two sets of people who don't like each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm glad you put it the way you did, like with framing, because that's kind of, I think in some ways that's what's so impoverishing on our side of the world, is that the wider framing around this is so incredibly baby-brained that the idea, and it's like classic American liberal thinking, primarily in the sense of, oh, the big bad regime is killing innocent protesters, and like this is the end and the beginning of this story, and evil incarnate is embodied by this regime, and we have to do something to improve this, and usually we use words like democracy and freedom and human rights. And Jamal, in a lot of ways, whom I respect and who has a much harder job than I do in terms of representing a constituency of diaspora Iranians. I represent a constituency of one, which is me. Although sometimes I'm many people, I contain manic multitudes at times. Maybe my chihuahua. Okay, so that's where I'll extend my discursive range. But at the end of the day, what I profoundly disagree with him is that Iranians are fed up with this regime. I do not have the ability, and neither does Jamal, to see into the minds of 92 million Iranians. Okay, nobody does. And there's a weird sport or a kind of weird tea leaf reading exercise done by a certain class of people in the West, many of whom are liberal Iranians. We'll talk about that later, but in the sense of like they are the spokesperson for this secret, unconscious, completely suppressed body politic of Iranians who crave for liberal freedoms that they don't have. Is there a portion of truth to this? Sure. Is there a portion of the Iranian population that wants to see the end of the Islamic Republic? I would say yes, but none of us know what that portion is. And if you judge it based upon the size of the protests, of the protest against, that's not necessarily a reflection of wanting to overthrow the government. People protest to improve the state, to improve their lives. In the West, we use protest in bad places to help induce state collapse. That's why the people who are working at night illegally against the laws of the country, right? There was a nationwide curfew, which was imposed, and anybody who was out who was breaking the law, right? And there was on top of that extreme amounts of violence. Why is it that liberals here, and I would put this to Jamal, I mean, he can't respond, so sorry, Jamal, but come on my show, we can do this live. But like, why is it that the liberals and everybody else, really, not just them, I'm not holding them to some sort of responsibility, but the framing of all this is when illegal things are illegal here and you don't do them. You don't break Starbucks windows. You don't murder police. Like, imagine if they murdered police here by the thousands, in the hundreds and thousands maybe. There would be concentration camps on our streets. They would be herding people into soccer stadiums, into football stadiums, because we have such an extreme response from our state. And at a certain layer of understanding, a state is not a person. It's not this embodiment of feelings that liberals like always think it is. They think it's this nice, cushy thing. It's a collection of laws, and those laws are backed by violence. What's happening in Iran is part of a hybrid warfare strategy that recognizes and utilizes legitimate protest to help induce state collapse. So the extreme amount of violence we are seeing is not normal. Iranians, despite what Jamal said, protest all the time. There's lots of protests in the countries. It's simply not true that they're not allowed to protest. It's simply not true. This is a fiction. This is a fiction. Okay? People protest. Iran is not the police state that the US is, with the highest incarcerations in the world, where people are being murdered in the streets, kidnapped for tweeting, like God knows what. I mean, this is I'm picking on Jamal. I'm sorry, Jamal. Again, I know you're not here, and I don't mean anything against you, really. But the idea of ambivalence he cited, that's their ambivalence. My ambivalence doesn't exist. I defend Iranian sovereignty. if that means fighting back against armed rioters who are destroying city buses, who are destroying vital public infrastructure, who are attacking banks, people also, this would not be acceptable here. It simply wouldn't. We have an army of people who make careers lecturing everybody else about nonviolence. And suddenly the rules don't apply to other states. So this is the fundamental issue with our framing. We have to grow up. We have to talk as if all states are legitimate and we have to judge them according to their own laws and workings, or we just make up our own rules. So when the US does extreme law enforcement, that's normal. Oh, okay, you can decry it, but that's part of the logic of the US. But when Iran does it, it's unthinkable. It requires immense amount of media panic. The same media panic, by the way, which has been totally absent during the Holocaust in Gaza. So this is the ambivalence that I heard about. That's to me is that the inability to take a position and to realize using critical thinking skills that like the Kantian imperative, sorry to be pedantic, I can't help it, I was born this way, but like the Kantian imperative, like you like do unto others as you had done to you. Would you want people to protest here like the way they do in Iran? I would say no. That the people who are now, especially liberals, who say things like, oh, we have to listen to the Iranian voice, these are platitudes, man. These are platitudes. 92 million people don't have a voice. They have 92 million voices. And it's the job of the state to bring that cacophony, sorry, again, pedantic,
it's okay,
but like into some kind of like symphonic whatever, like to unite people and put them in a sort of state framework. These are not like, and I'm not sitting here now like what's going to happen. Sorry, I'm just like on a rant. But like what's going to happen is that like we're going to rehearse the thing that happens here, which is, oh, Sina, you support the bad thing that the government is doing. And so like then you're trapped in this game, right? Of like, you have to denounce the government the way I do. Okay, so this is this rhetorical thing that always ends up in that little like ditch, that kind of discursive ditch where you have to sit there and be like, I pledge allegiance to the regime change operation. Like, it's like this stops people from talking. This stops people from like actually discussing what's happening. And it's extremely like frustrating. I've been doing this for years. Anyways, yeah, sorry, that was a complete rant.
I know. I appreciate your perspective, and you're actually making me want to like host a friendly debate. I think it would be useful actually, because this is what we're seeing happen. And I at the end of the day, like I think because we've seen this happen in so many places, it's the same script every single time, and then parts of it start unraveling. And that's what I wanted to ask you about, because I don't know if you have the specifics on like which organization has been being used for the death toll. I know it's like some, NGO based out of Northern Virginia that most of the media has been citing for like 2,500 deaths, maybe 3,000 deaths. Then you've got Laura Loomer. I don't know where she's getting the numbers. Like one day it's like 10,000. The next day she's like 15,000. Now she's like, it's 20,000 deaths, and CBS News is reporting that based on nothing. It's like amazing. Iran's capacity for killing protesters is apparently higher than Israel's capacity to commit a Holocaust in Gaza, to be able to kill 20,000 people in a couple of weeks. But no, in all seriousness, you do have a lot of propaganda being thrown around to rev up excitement and enthusiasm for regime change in Iran. So let's go to the basics. Why? Because this isn't about, even if Iran's killing thousands of people, this isn't about human rights. It's not about democracy. It's about what Iran has done to piss off America, which is, take it from there, Sina.
Oh, sovereignty. That's it. That's all that this is. This is always about the same thing. It's sovereignty. States aren't allowed to be sovereign. There's only one sovereign power in the Westoid worldview. That's called Uncle Sam. So anybody who breaks with that has to be brought to heel. So they've been trying to do that for 5 decades to Iran, 5 decades of siege, of war, of media, freaking insane media campaigns to villainize us and dehumanize us. I mean, and we've now reached a point where they've brought the actual war to the homeland. I mean, the 12-day war, you have to realize this. The 12-day war was intended to be a kind of like daring operation, of a decapitation strike, as they love to call it, followed by, what should be a kind of like mass uprising or something. But it in fact affected the opposite. It united people around the system of the Islamic Republic, warts and all of its problems notwithstanding. It united them and says, okay, this machine guarded us with its missiles. This machine inflicted heavy damage for the losses that 1,000 civilian deaths inflicted upon us. That you can't regime your way out of it. Just say you sprinkle the word regime all over your thing. You can't get out of that just by delegitimizing it. The people of Iran saw what the purpose of the Islamic Republic's military machine is for, is to defend itself from outside invasion and attack, which is exactly what happened, which is an attack on sovereignty at the end of the day. Okay, and so destroying state institutions, finding the worst people on the planet and paying them potentially, which is some of the evidence coming out now. Do you really think it's impossible for the worst people on the planet who are crowing about their involvement in this, who are so excited talking about it that they can't help themselves, saying how inactive they are in this? So either they're lying or they're telling the truth. They are probably telling the truth this time, because states protests don't get this violent on their own. Okay, this does not normally happen. In 2009, there were millions of people on the street in Iran, and it didn't even approach this level of violence. Even in 2019, which was pretty nigh violent, doesn't even come close to this. This is hybrid warfare. We have to have serious conversations. We can debate the contours and the ethics of the Islamic Republic's response to that. I'd be happy to with anybody who's there. We could talk about the figures, the numbers. Unfortunately, though, is that I don't begin from the same starting point of instant denunciation. I don't do that. That doesn't get us anywhere. Who does that help? What right do I have to say what Iranians want? Who the hell am I? I'm just some loser in the West. I haven't lived there since I was a baby. And that's mostly the case for people who are speaking of the situation in Iran in the West. Mostly the case. Okay, otherwise people, that's another story altogether about diaspora and representation, but I won't open that can of worms.
Yeah. Listen, that's a whole other show, and we could bring in several other countries and have a very interesting conversation. You are often having interesting conversations on your podcast. The East is a podcast. Sina Rahmani, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for the invite. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Rania?
Oh, he's the best. Got to have him back on to talk more about this. That was not long enough. I have a feeling there's going to be plenty of opportunity because this story is not going away.
It does not
but
seem
really,
like it is.
No, but really giving, I get the Syria vibes from this, a way bigger country. And one thing that didn't get discussed that we'll definitely come back to is the way the US and the Israelis really do want to chop up Iran. The way they have chopped up, especially the Israelis, they love to chop up their adversaries and by literally balkanize by ethnicity across the region, by sect, and they have plans for that in Iran too if they were to have their way, and that's what we're watching them do it in Syria right now. The Israelis are very much in support of the idea of having a Syria split into the Alawite coast and the Druze south and the rest of the Sunni area here. It's just Lebanon being split into a Christian north or a Sunni north and a Christian mountains and a Shia south, and this is their idea for the region. And it's just a country of, imagine, Iran is a country of 80 million people. I don't think they'll get their way, but man, everywhere you look, the US wants to do that to Russia. They want to do it to China. That's their answer for everything, is split it all up and make them fight each other.
100%. Well, it's the number one imperial strategy of all time. Divat el impetor, right? Isn't that the Latin there? The Roman divide and conquer? I might have that not 100% correct, but as Lord Elphinstone once famously wrote back, he was one of the top British colonial officials in India, to a contemporary. He said, we have to do just like the Romans do, divide and conquer. And Africa, Latin America, how did, Cortez take over the Aztec Empire? He was able to divide and conquer and create an army of 100,000 indigenous people who had their own issues with the Aztecs and turn them against each other. The same thing in Africa, turning the coastal states against the interior states, and vice versa in certain conversations. Obviously, in India, we saw how they did it and how they left their indelible mark on the country with partition, to really put a poison pill in the decolonization of it. Obviously, the Opium Wars and the division of China over the years that led to the 100 years of humiliation, as they called it in China, which led to the 1949 revolution, which one of the key factors was reuniting the country because it had been so divided by imperialists. I could actually go on and on and on and on if I wanted to keep talking about this, but it really is the nature of how imperialism can rule. It's a minority of people trying to rule over the majority of the world. So they can only do it by pitting people against each other, oftentimes with legitimate grievances. Like, that's what makes it so, poisonous in so many different ways, is that oftentimes they're able to use things that are not fake but are real, in order to manipulate the situation. But, as we've said before, and as you've alluded to, we've seen in Iraq, we've seen in all these different places, Libya, the impact of this, and it's rarely what they claim it's going to be. But we'll keep covering it. We'll keep pushing on. You've even promised people a debate, Rania, so now you've backed yourself into a corner. They'll be demanding it in the comment section. But that being said...
Bring them back! Bring them back!
Listen, I think two very smart people. I think with a good interlocutor like yourself, you could actually have a very fruitful conversation that no one else will actually have. So who knows? Maybe we'll be able to do it. Either way, it would only happen on Breakthrough News, I'll tell you that. That being said, let's move on to another massive issue that's certainly shaking the world, but certainly shaking the United States of America. That is the ongoing situation regarding just ICE in general and the mass deportation campaign. What's happening in Minneapolis and in Minnesota, where there's been a surge of thousands of various different DHS officers and a sort of brutal crackdown going on there at times, and how all of that starts to cross over with your retirement fund or your savings if they're in some sort of money market account. So to talk more about this, we are very, very happy to be joined here on the show by Meghdad Boshi, who's an independent journalist and professor of journalism at the University of Memphis. Meghdad, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, great to have you here. You were one of the authors of a recent piece on Breakthrough News. Your retirement account could be contributing to over $1 billion invested in ICE detention. Scary sounding thing for a lot of people who are very opposed to what's happening with ICE these days. I guess just to start, how is that the case? What's going on? Like, $1 billion, that's a lot of money. And how much of this is helping keep afloat this massive system of immigration detention?
Yeah, look, it's very interesting. And this is actually an investigation we worked on for several months because we had to peel back all the layers and really get to the bottom of it. What essentially happens is that when you're investing in a mutual fund or you're investing in a retirement fund like a 401k, you are doing that through some of these big asset management companies. It could be BlackRock, it could be Vanguard, Fidelity, and so on and so forth. Now, the thing is that you're not necessarily checking what the mutual fund itself is then investing in. So you're investing in the mutual fund, or you're investing in the exchange traded fund, or you're putting in money in your 401k, but you're not bothering to check what your 401k fund is then investing in, right? And what we found was that these large asset management companies are actually have their funds invested in CoreCivic and Geo Group, which are two sort of large private prison companies, the two of the largest private prison companies in the US, and also notorious because they're the ones that operate a large number of ICE detention centers, more than any other company. And these ICE detention centers have been sites of horrific human rights abuse, allegations of abuse, misconduct of towards detainees, and so on and so forth, right? There have been detainees who say we're treated like dogs in cages in these ICE detention centers, right? And so there are so many people we've seen getting out onto the streets, protesting against ICE. I was just in Minneapolis over the past week reporting for Breakthrough, and we saw such anger, outrage at what ICE was doing. And when we spoke to some of those people and asked them, hey, do you have like 401ks or mutual funds? They're like, yeah. In which companies? In these companies. And then when we told them that these same companies had these funds invested in Geo Group and CoreCivic, so many of them were shocked. They didn't know that they were financially invested in the very thing that they were opposing.
I mean, just unbelievable. And of course, as you mentioned, this is with the backdrop of Minneapolis taking place where you've been, and you've reported for us from on the ground there. Can you just give us an idea of your observations? I mean, it looks like a war zone watching these videos coming out of Minneapolis right now, and it seems to be getting more and more dangerous by the day.
Yeah, you were talking about regimes and authoritarian sort of bends, and that's exactly what we're seeing in Minneapolis, right? This is happening against the wishes of the state administration. We live in a federal country with a division of powers between states and the federal government. That's the argument that Donald Trump himself makes when he talks about, say, an abortion, the issue of abortion, and how states should regulate that. But when it comes to law and order in this situation, we're seeing the complete takeover of law enforcement in Minneapolis by these federal agents. And when I say takeover, I mean in specific sense about immigration detention efforts. But those detention efforts are happening, arrest efforts, those arrest efforts are happening in ways that aren't typical. You're seeing federal agents now, immigration agents, go door to door. You're seeing them break open a door of a home. You're seeing them pick up teenage boys from the streets based on how they look. And remember, the Supreme Court has sort of like a few months earlier validated this sort of racial profiling on the streets in one of their judgments. And you're seeing that play out on the road. You're seeing immigration agents ask people that, where are you born? And when they question back, why are you asking me that? They're saying, because you have an accent. Since when is it illegal to have an accent in the United States of America? Right? So people are being profiled by the color of their skin, by the way they speak, by the clothes they wear. And this is happening in a way that is deeply unsafe for Minnesotans, right? And Minnesotans, we're seeing, are rising up with what we've sort of described in one of our latest pieces on Breakthrough as the growing power of community, right? So there are more ICE watch groups, there are more rapid response lines, there are people keeping each other informed, there are whistles being 3D printed and distributed across the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. So every protest or vigil you attend, you'll find people handing out whistles for free. Why the whistles? Because the moment you see federal agents or vehicles carrying federal agents, individuals then start whistling. So if you whistle in short bursts, it means that federal agents are in your vicinity. If you whistle in long bursts, it means that they're actively trying to detain or arrest someone, right? You've seen cars honking in a similar manner to alert people that a vehicle with federal agents is driving past, right? So all these systems are coming up, and it's not just about the arrests. Immigrants are too scared to leave home. There are immigrants who are US citizens, naturalized US citizens, or citizens, say, with Somali roots, US citizens who are scared of leaving home. There are people who aren't citizens yet, absolutely terrified. Shops are empty, malls are deserted, the streets are more vacant than they used to be, right? And so immigrants who are scared of going to work are losing out on their wages. They're losing out on their salaries. And so other people in the community are taking it upon themselves to deliver groceries to them, to go to their homes and drop off food and essential items. They're also taking it upon them to pick up their children, immigrant children, and drop them off to school, pick them up once again when school is done, drop them off home. And we're seeing this power of community. But at the same time, what is all of this for? What benefit is Trump's siege on Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the rest of Minnesota actually providing anyone in any meaningful, tangible way in the United States?
No, I think it's a critically important point, and I'm glad you mentioned people who are afraid to leave their homes. And I'm sure not just the act of being deported in general, but the act of being detained, which I think is relevant to the issue of Geo Group and CoreCivic and the money invested in them, these private prisons, because it seems like they undoubtedly are incentivized to treat people very poorly. And what do we know about the conditions in these detention centers?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, how it works is the Geo Group and CoreCivic will be getting paid for how many people they hold in their centers and for how long they hold them, right? And we've heard like the CEOs of these two companies boast to their investors, this is the best period we've had in our 42-year history. said a CEO of one of these companies, right? And so they are naturally, I mean, seemingly jubilant that Trump's immigration enforcement overdrive, which in the first 9 months of the Trump administration last year led to more than 220,000 arrests, right? And so these people, a lot of those people then went to detention centers operated by Geo Group and CoreCivic. And we've seen how the allegations of medical neglect, that people not getting their sort of medicines and healthcare properly in these places. We've seen allegations of just poor treatment, of abuse of detainees, right? And all of it is going from American taxpayer dollars. And by the way, I should actually correct myself. Not just American taxpayer dollars, everyone who lives and works in the United States, whether they be US citizens or not, whether they are undocumented or documented immigrants, also pay taxes. And these taxpayer dollars are then being funneled to these private corporations to run these detention centers. And again, one has to ask the question that you're seeing abuse on one side, you're seeing taxpayer dollars funneled away. In what meaningful way is this benefiting the country? Donald Trump, for example, in a recent Truth Social post just a couple of days back, said that what federal agents are doing in Minnesota is removing criminals from the streets. But our analysis of actual government data, ICE data, from the first 9 months of the Trump administration's crackdown showed that 44% of ICE arrests in Minnesota were of individuals with no criminal record. That's no convictions, no pending criminal charges. 63% of those arrested had no convictions. So we're seeing that what Trump is saying on one hand about removing criminals on the street isn't actually what's happening on the streets.
Well,
there's one more thing I wanted to ask about. Since you have been in Minneapolis and you see the situation on the ground, we also see today Trump threatening once again to invoke the Insurrection Act. And that would give him more power to have federal authorities like go shut down protests across the country. So I guess my question is, given what you're seeing on the ground in Minneapolis, where if the videos that we're seeing as well show almost an attempt to provoke a reaction from the public, to give Trump exactly what he wants. We're hearing there's going to be some sort of right-wing rally in support of ICE. Also seems an attempt to provoke a reaction to give Trump that justification. And I'm just curious your read on that situation, and if maybe people on the ground are a bit concerned about that this is all about obviously carrying out this very white supremacist agenda of just, making people of color and immigrants feel incredibly unsafe and unwanted in the U.S. But on top of that, of trying to provoke a violent clash that he could then use to invoke further executive authority across the country in various capacities.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what I saw on the ground. I was reporting outside the Bishop Whipple building in Minnesota, which near Minneapolis, which basically houses an ICE facility there. And outside the Whipple building, there were protesters across the street who were chanting and sloganeering against what ICE and the Trump administration were doing, completely unprovoked. Scores of, like dozens of federal agents walked towards the protesters and started firing gas canisters, right? It was another matter that on that occasion that I was there, the wind was actually blowing against them. So the gas blew back at the federal agents. And I mean, the protesters had a good laugh. But you're seeing, is it illegal to protest outside a federal facility? Right? So you're seeing that every aspect of regular sort of life or the rights that people have, and not just immigrants, the rights that US citizens also have, is being encroached upon in so many ways. Renee Nicole Good, for crying out loud, was a white woman who was murdered. And within minutes of her murder, you had the highest echelons of the federal government referring to her that she was engaging in domestic terrorism with no proof. You had the vice president quote tweeting videos attempting to show her in the wrong when you saw visual analysis multiple angles, several videos showing that Rene Nicole Good had not run over an ICE officer. You had people claiming that that this officer was fighting for his life when you could see the man just walking calmly across after shooting Rene and calling her, pardon my French, a fucking bitch, right? And so you're seeing this complete dissonance between what the facts on the ground are and how the administration is trying to portray them. Now, to answer your specific question, are protesters worried? Are organizers worried that if they get into some sort of clash with law enforcement, it's going to invite even further sort of heavy-handed actions? The truth of the matter is the protests, by and large, have been peaceful. The only occasions where like something out of the ordinary seemed to have happened was last night when some of these ICE vehicles were vandalized, had stuff painted on them when ICE agents left them for a bit and went away. But by and large, protesters are engaging in that constitutionally given right to free speech and protest, right? And so it is the federal government and their agents' actions impinging upon those rights, encroaching upon those rights, that honestly the opposition, including the Democrats from the top to the bottom, should be countering. And are we seeing that? Are we seeing the Democratic Party really counter what's happening full-throated in a manner that they must? We're seeing local leaders speak up for the rights of Minnesotans. But are we seeing the whole party as a whole, all its senators, all its House members, condemning and doing the most they can to protect the rights of these vulnerable Minnesotans? I mean, the jury would be out on that, but from what I've heard from several Minnesotans, they don't seem to think so.
Mm. Meghdad Boshi, independent journalist and professor of journalism at the University of Memphis. And as I said at the beginning, one of the authors of Your Retirement Account Could Be Contributing to Over $1 billion invested in ICE detention at breakthroughnews.org, as well as upcoming pieces on breakthroughnews.org. Thanks so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to move forward here to another critically important issue, and that is the ongoing tensions all across Latin America being stoked by the United States government. Of course, we saw what's been going on in Venezuela, and we've been reporting on that, but there is increased focus by the U.S. on Cuba. And to talk more about this, we are very honored to be joined by Luis de Jesus, who is a journalist with Breakthrough News based in Cuba. Luis, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Eugene. Thanks for having me, Rania. It's always a pleasure to be with you from the Freedom Side.
Mm-hmm. Well, the pleasure is all ours. And as you know very well, the U.S. is threatening Cuba significantly more now. Donald Trump has been threatening to try to cut off all oil and other aid to the island. So I was hoping you could just start by talking about what is the existing impact of the U.S. blockade on Cuba on the average person, and how much worse could it get if the U.S. is able to carry out its threats to try to cut off all energy and other types of aid?
Well, Eugene, that's actually a pretty good question. You know, the United States economic, commercial, and financial blockade against Cuba is not simply a set of sanctions. We have to say it is a policy of economic warfare. That has, of course, limited the island's sovereign development for more than 6 decades now. So the Cuban government has, for example, estimated that between March 2024 and February 2025 alone, the direct damages, I should say, caused by the blockade amounted to more than $7.5 billion. That's a lot for a small country like Cuba, for example, and the cumulative impact since its implementations, I'm talking about the blockade, is estimated at hundreds of billions of dollars in economic losses. So, of course, one of the most sensitive areas of these damages is energy and fuel, which we're talking about now, because Cuba relies heavily on imports to meet, for example, its electricity generation and transportation needs. Previously, Venezuela, as you may know, had been one of the main suppliers of oil to the island. But in recent years, because of the intensification of U.S. Unilateral actions and sanctions, including, for example, threats against other countries that would supply oil to Cuba. Well, these imports have drastically reduced. This has had serious consequences for the national energy system, and we should say resulting primarily, but not only in persistent power outages and fuel shortages. And of course, these type of measures are not only an attempt to strangle the Cuban economy, but also an extension of the United States' historical policy of subjugation of the island, and of course, the people's Latin America, which the United States insists in calling its backyard.
Mm-hmm. You know, Luis, as you know, these sanctions, this blockade that's been in place on Cuba, and increasingly escalating, of course, has always been meant to try to not just, of course, immiserate the population of Cuba and try to strangle the government, but also try to get the population to get so angry and frustrated they rise up and get rid of the government themselves. That was actually written in a State Department memo back in the 60s, or maybe 1959. Somewhere around then, there's a State Department memo that actually says that. So I'm curious if you can kind of give us a sense of the mood on the ground among Cubans in the face of such aggressive moves from the Trump administration.
Of course, Rania. Well, first we have to bear in mind that when people in any country of the world, we're not talking just about Cuba, but any country in the world, have to live under these pretty difficult conditions for a long period of time. I mean, we're talking about power outages, fuel shortages, increased economic uncertainty. For example, it is entirely normal that people start feeling desperate, to say it at least, you know. But we have to understand that that is precisely the purpose of these policies of the United States, to create a sense of unease and hopelessness in the population. Having said that, of course, I always say to the people that ask me this kind of question that, of course, there is some discontent and, of course, concern about this situation, shortages, blackouts, economic situation, etc. But Cubans are a very well-informed people. They know what they are going through and why the United States is doing this, and why and what's the U.S. main purpose. And that's why there's also a strong feelings of resistance, patriotic pride, of defense of their homeland, of course, which are rooted in decades of struggle for sovereignty and against foreign intervention. So there's, on one side, there's concern about what's going to happen in the closest future, but also Cubans are resisting, and they know that they have to resist if they want to defend their homeland from the United States imperialism.
You know, I think you're hitting on a really important point, Luis, and that is, you know, the way it's portrayed in the U.S. media, as you know very well, is that Cuba is a country where, you know, everyone hates the government has no support, it's just an isolated dictatorship. As Trump said, it's about to fall. So I wonder just how you evaluate those claims and how you respond to people who say, well, there's no democracy whatsoever in Cuba.
Well, as a matter of fact, I was raised all my life just listening to this Western media and US media outlets saying that Cuba is a country without democracy, without freedoms, and with a population that supposedly largely oppose its government. Well, I should start by saying that this narrative serves entirely geopolitical interest, and they are seeking to justify policies of pressure and sanctions, seeking to justify the blockade against Cuba, against the Cuban people. And but of course, this political and social reality is much more complex than that. Western media often leave entirely out of their narratives the achievements of the Cuban Revolution in health, for example, in education, and any much more other areas. But besides that, I have to say this, as I said before, they serve a narrative. They are looking just to justify, as well as they did in Venezuela, for example, trying to justify the capture and kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro. They've been trying to justify these blockades, these sanctions, these illegal sanctions against the Cuban. But much of the U.S. media ignores or manipulates historical context, also from, as I'm saying, the impact of the economic blockade, the persistence of the external threat, and as a structuring, I should say, factor in Cuban domestic politics. Finally, this biased presentation favors discourses that seek to delegitimize the Cuban government, its revolution, but it's much of it's just nonsense and lies.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to clarify before we get back. I just want to make sure I get this right. It was a State Department memo from 1990. Just wanted to reiterate that so I wasn't wrong. It's, you can literally go look it up at the Office of the Historian of the U.S. government, and you can read the memo yourself. It calls for making the greatest inroads and denying money and supplies to Cuba to decrease monetary and real wages, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of the government. That is a U.S. State Department memo explicitly talking about the reasons behind the blockade on Cuba. So, Luis, I wanted to ask you, you've covered many events in solidarity with Palestine, in solidarity with Venezuela, in Cuba, for us at Breakthrough News. Can you talk about the international spirit that is very much present till now among the Cuban population?
Sure, Rania. I just want to add something just before answering your question. President Donald Trump himself said like a week ago that there was not much more that the United States government could do to further damage the Cuban population. He said it himself. So he's just acknowledging that the U.S. blockade, U.S. sanctions for more than 6 decades have been meant to damage Cuba, to damage its development, and to just keep away any kind of opportunity for the Cuban people. Just going back to your question, well, of course, one of the distinctive characteristics of the Cuban Revolution has been its solidarity with Latin America and Africa. They are well known and the entire world, and liberation and emancipation struggles throughout the world. And this remains much more alive in numerous popular and institutional actions and expressions here in Cuba. Cuba has been, of course, an active actor in solidarity with Palestine and Gaza Strip, as you said it before, and Venezuela. Also, with Puerto Rico's independence struggle, which I'm from, so I have to add that too. They're both in official statements and in mobilizations and joint support campaigns among social movements. But I just wanted to say that international friendship and solidarity from Cuba is one of the main, if not the main, characteristic of the Cuban Revolution. It was a main purpose from Fidel Castro, leader of the Revolution of Cuba, also Che Guevara, and all its leadership. So it's an international spirit, which is not merely, it's part of the historical tradition that has led Cuba to, as we know, send medical brigades to dozens of countries, support anti-imperialist countries in Africa, as I said before, Latin America, Asia, and of course, to promote South-South cooperation. Whether it is through ALBA movements, CELAC movements, and other movements in Latin America. Just to end my answer here, there's no other way, as I would say it, or as I would say that to see this that as an element of the foreign policy of peoples to build a more just and supportive world in the face of imperialism, of course, U.S. imperialism, first of all, and global powers structures that keep concentrating wealth and domination. And of course, Cuba has been always a main character in that fight in the entire world.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot to keep covering, a lot to keep doing. Thankfully, we have you there on the ground, Luis, covering it all, or as much as is possible for one person to cover on the island of Cuba. Luis de Jesus, journalist with Breakthrough News based in Cuba. Thank you so much for joining us on the Freedom Side and all your other great work.
Thank you for having me.
Rania?
I mean, I've been to Cuba a couple times. I feel very lucky that I have gotten to visit and spend time with people there. And just lovely, lovely people, lovely, lovely place. I know that sounds very cliche, like what place isn't, I guess, but it's just the way it's framed in the media is so unfair. And it's just all because they try to determine their own economic system in a way that benefits them rather than prioritizes U.S. empire.
100%.
And that's it. That's all Cuba's been guilty of. And of course, the fact that it's a socialist economic model, you can't have that succeed. And it's amazing because they'll say, oh, like Cuba's a failure because socialism. It's like, I mean, if you think socialism sucks so bad and is going to be an automatic failure, then why don't you let Cuba fail at it instead of making it fail with a 60-year-long blockade?
Well, all these same media people who report these same things about Cuba will be more than happy to go to some Gulf state and speak at some big fancy thing about the media or whatever when the people serving them are living in shipping containers and have their passports taken from them. But that being said,
or report on the human rights abuses that they see everywhere in the world at outlets funded by those Gulf states. That gets me better than anything else is when you have someone at some outlet funded by a Gulf state, literally built with current slave labor, and like being these places are total police states, surveillance states. Like there's literally no freedom whatsoever. And they're sitting there whining about like how you need to condemn this and that and how these states are so evil and bad. It's really incredible.
Yeah, no, the whole sort of Atlantic Council, crowd of people, regime change advocates, they always say whenever you raise points like this, oh, well, it's whataboutism, as if the relative nature of life is not something that is like everything is governed by a certain sense of relativity. You know what I mean? And like they're acting as like, well, just because you say this, just because that, but like if it's 100% hypocritical, that is in fact relevant. But that's a whole other story. Well, that's a whole other issue.
When you're getting cut checks from the Saudi royal family, I mean, of course, you're going to be like, well, that's whataboutism for you to point out a very inconvenient sounding fact about where I work.
Indeed. Well, that will bring us to the end of today's show before we get in trouble with anyone else here. We've already got enough of them on our back. But Rania, before we get out of here, are there things you want to remind our viewers of?
Yes, I want to remind our viewers that the people who hate us most are funded by fascists, right-wing oligarch billionaires like Larry Ellison and Rupert Murdoch, literally. And they have a lot more resources than we do. We're trying our best here at Breakthrough News, with independent media outlets. The only way to keep us going and growing is from the support of our viewers. So if you are able to, please, buy one less coffee a month and give us $5 or more by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news. And, I know it sounds like not a lot, but if, we've got thousands, tens of thousands of people consuming our content, if just a fraction of them are, throwing in a little bit of money every month, it helps us hire more editors, hire more reporters, put more resources into doing investigative reporting, and keeping the content coming so that when we've got on the precipice of war, which it seems to be every other day in the year 2026, you've got coverage giving you the reality of what the hell's going on here at Breakthrough News. And I'm talking about war just not only abroad, but that imperial boomerang coming back home in places like Minnesota right now. So patreon.com/breakthrough news. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you smash that like button.
Right on. Well, couldn't say it better myself. As always, for myself, for Rania, for our whole Breakthrough News team, big shout out to all of our guests and everyone who viewed, and we will see you next time.